With the recent announcement of The Incredibles 3, I started digging into my backlog and my memory. Nearly 20 years ago, I remember being in high school playing the Incredibles theme song as a percussion player in a multi-school collaborative honors band in Middle Ohio. I have some good memories with the franchise. But let's get back to the backlog and dive right in. Not exactly the best optimized game out there, but here is my review of LEGO The Incredibles for the Nintendo Switch. The story here is basically just the story of the two Incredibles movies. It starts out with you in the middle of Incredibles 2 and has you going through the first movie as well. Most of these stories are the same as their movie counterparts, though the game does flesh out a few things a bit more, like Incrediboy's interactions with Mr. Incredible at the beginning of the first movie, and a lot more dialogue between the various supers with Elastigirl in her missions during Incredibles 2. But the main events are pretty much the same as they were in the movies. When it comes to gameplay, like other LEGO games, this is an action-adventure game with puzzle and beat-em-up mechanics thrown in. In terms of features, this on Switch is the same as it is on other platforms. You've got story missions to go through and a fully functional open-world sandbox city for you to explore to do side missions, races, gather collectibles, and the like. The Switch version also supports the 2-character cheat codes the other versions can use, as well as couch co-op play if you connect a second controller and hit plus to play as a secondary character. The game is admittedly a bit weird in how you progress through its content though. You have access to free roam and the side content pretty much all the time, but it's got you going through the movies in reverse order. You do the entirety of The Incredibles 2 before you're able to go back and play Incredibles 1. In most other LEGO games, like say LEGO Marvel's Avengers, you would start off doing an intro level in the more recent movie, but then be able to go back and do the movies in order. I can understand the idea of wanting to do the more recent movie first, but this is, to my knowledge, the only LEGO game that has you do it like this. When you get into the actual gameplay, it's pretty good. We have the typical beat-em-up combat with enemies in enclosed areas and doing puzzles based on character abilities. In this aspect, I like the game. You have people with the typical LEGO powers like Heat Ray for gold objects, grappling tools, and whatnot, but a lot of the characters feel very different. There are different combo speeds and styles as you go through, along with only certain characters having the classic LEGO ground pound from the sky, many of the others having a sort of aerial combo that you can chain together. This game also has a super attack system where you can hold the Y button after fighting for a while to do a big area attack, and pretty much everyone's super attacks look different, including some of the more out there side characters you unlock just for open world or free play. Outside of characters, the puzzles are fairly standard with you needing a certain character ability to activate an object or assemble a LEGO build after breaking everything in the room. And this goes from normal stages to boss fights, where a lot of bosses have you maneuvering around fighting off grunts, but also having to do some sort of character ability puzzle thing to get to the point where you can actually damage the boss character. There are a couple new things here as well, like the family build minigame that has your entire party building together and you gotta manage everyone's gauges, but a lot of it is fairly standard LEGO formula. Once you finish a story level, you unlock characters and mystery packs, little toy bags you can open for another character unlock. These can also be bought in the game store and earned by doing missions in the free roam sandbox. And let's talk about that. The story is sort of integrated into the open world. Missions kind of limit you to one area, but you do go to a certain place on the sandbox map to start the next story level. But what the sandbox lets you do, I find really interesting in this game. The story is sort of expanded in crime waves, sets of missions you do in different regions of the city to stop a supervillain like the Underminer, Brain Freezer, or Syndrome. These are comprised of little missions like rolling bombs to safe zones or just taking out enemies in different areas. But it feels like it's embedded in the story itself. While it doesn't really make sense within the confines of Incredibles 1 and 2 for supers to be out and about taking out crime, there are these little reporter scenes for each crime wave talking about what's happening, what supervillain is going at it, and you get these story mode level boss fights with the villains, showing cutscenes and whatnot that just makes it feel like it's an actual part of the story and not just some little side content that's there for something else you can do gameplay wise. I really like this feature. So much so that I stopped doing the story mode in the middle of Incredibles 1 just to do the 10 crime waves. more LEGO games need to do this. Like having a Marvel or DC game include special cinematic boss fights with villains that don't show up in the game's main story. Plus, they unlock a lot of map markers for collectibles, family builds, and races, along with the special Pixar family builds that are unlocked when completing crime waves. That's another thing that kept me doing these crime waves. While this isn't nearly as much of a crossover game as LEGO Batman 3 was, which I just called LEGO Justice League when I reviewed it on the Vita, there are a ton of Pixar references in this game. Pizza Planet boxes and story levels, and almost a dozen playable characters you can unlock for free play and the free roam sandbox. Merida from Brave, Flick from A Bug's Life, Dory from Finding Nemo, Woody from Toy Story. I found a ton of fun just unlocking the Pixar characters. But there is one thing I didn't like about the gameplay, and that's really on optimization. Pretty much all of the driving and swimming controls seem to have a lot of input lag compared to normal character gameplay. Whenever I chose to turn left or right in a vehicle or when I was swimming, there was a huge amount of input delay and lag. But it was only when swimming and driving. Even jumping out of the water while swimming makes turning have almost no input delay at all, and the moment you're in the water again, it's huge again. The other downside is that there's not really that much content when compared to other LEGO games. Outside of the free roam stuff, the game's story should only take you around 5 to 6 hours to complete. I got to the end after around 10 hours, mostly from spending so much time in the free roam city doing the 10 crime waves and collecting bricks for the Pixar family builds. But even LEGO Avengers, which also only adapted 2 movies, managed to be over 8 hours long. Next up is presentation, and visually, I think the game looks good. Some of the stuff is jaggy slightly here and there, but overall it looks fine and only gets a slight blur when going into handheld mode. The main problem of this game is performance. The first issue are the load times. Whenever you boot into the game or go from story level to story level, you're going to be waiting at least a full minute to a minute and a half before that will load in. The game is also very unstable with frame rate. There are some areas where it's fine around 30 FPS, but the vast majority of anything that involves fighting enemies will almost always be dropping frames into the 20s. And if you add rain to the mix, it gets even worse. It's playable, but a somewhat choppy experience. The game's crashed on me a few times as well, normally when trying to load cutscenes at the end of story levels, like the Incredibles 2 train segment. It only happened a few times, but the game does not autosave that often, so every time I went back in, I had to repeat the entire story segment a second time. And now let's go into battery life. LEGO The Incredibles gives the original and light models a range of about 2 to 3 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5 to 6 hours. In conclusion, LEGO The Incredibles brought the 2 superhero movies to the Switch with a handful of other Pixar characters along for the ride. Now, the downside, the game's on the shorter side and has a very weird progression style, having you play the movies in reverse order. Adding in the consistent performance issues, this is certainly a playable LEGO game for the Switch, but far from optimal. Reviews to Go rates LEGO The Incredibles for the Nintendo Switch a 5.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.